I'm here co-hosting with the great Jeff Simmons. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Joel.
So you want to preview today's show?
Okay, well, we've got a fascinating lineup just for our listeners today. We are on for 2 hours, and it is the Fall Fund Drive here at WBAI. So we are seeking your pledges today, and just some information for you to write down. You want to go to the pledge line during the show at 516-620-3602, or go to give2, that's the number 2, WBAI.org. So during the show, we're going to have a few opportunities for you to call in or go online and donate for some specific gifts, and we're going to just talk a little about them. The first one will be, and Joel will give a little preview of what the movie's like, tickets to Moynihan the Movie at the Film Forum, which is at the Film Forum till October 16th, and that's for a donation of $50 or more. Joel?
Correct. Yesterday on my other show, the America We Need to Talk show, I had on the filmmakers of Moynihan. I did see the movie. It's a really excellent movie, whether you love Patrick Moynihan, hated Patrick Moynihan, or had indifferent feelings about him, which was pretty rare. It was great insights into his politics and a fascinating human being, so I recommend it.
So we also have today, and we'll give you more information on this throughout the show because we're going to bring on our first guest in just a few moments. We also have pairs of tickets to Flushing Town Hall. That's a venue in Flushing that presents global arts for a global community, and many of the artists who are performing there, you really don't get a chance to see them often in New York City. They're coming from abroad. And we've got tickets to a few events in December, a fusion music concert on December 2nd, Rainbow Fish. This is a family-friendly event, which is by the Mermaid Theatre of Nova Scotia. And we're going to have later on a guest from Flushing Town Hall who will talk about this. And another event on December 9th, From Ecuador to the World, which is under the baton of Maestro Manuel Campos. But also today, as we lead into the introduction of our first guest, we also, if you go online and you pledge or call at 516-620-3602, you can also donate to receive a fascinating book called The Rise of the Alt-Right, and how it's about how it has risen in awareness and prominence and its historical origins. And the author of that book is our first guest, and Joel is going to introduce him right now.
So our first guest is Thomas Main. He's a Baruch College professor at the Austin W. Marxe School. That's Marx with an E, different than Karl Marx. School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College, named after the great New Deal financier Bernard Baruch. Just embellishing the intro here. He's also the author of Homelessness in New York City, Policymaking from Koch to de Blasio. And he joins us today to discuss his book, The Rise of the Alt-Right, which both I and Jeff just read. We've done our homework. Published by the Brookings Institution Press. In this book, he traces the alt-right's origins, its history from its ideological roots in post-war America, although we can discuss that, to the White House today. And he's interviewed some of the ideology's most prominent thought leaders. I would put thought leaders in quotation marks, but that's just me. And examines traffic at alt-right and alt-light web magazines. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Hi there. I'm happy to be here.
So how did a fringe political ideology vault from relative obscurity to the forefront of American politics?
Well, there had always been this fringe, which, what used to be called right-wing extremism. Right? And it didn't get, these are people who were to the right of the National Review, if you can imagine that. Didn't get very far until about the turn of the millennium. Three things happened. One, big shakeup to the American political culture brought on by the shocks of the 21st century. Two, the rise of the internet, which made it much cheaper for marginal groups to reach widely distributed audiences. And three, the rise of Trump.
How large is the alt-right following? Give us a sense of that.
Well, now let's see. What I can tell you about is the size of the visitors and unique visitors. Okay, if one person goes to a site 5 times in a day, that's 5 visits, 1 unique visitor. What I can tell you about what we have hard numbers on is, the size of those audiences. All right. So if you look at, and what I did is I broke down web magazines according to their ideology. All right. And the categories I came up with were alt-right, right, right center, least biased, left center, and left. Okay. Now, if you look at this, and I looked at 10 alt-right sites, during the period that I looked at them, which was from about September 2016 to February 2018, all the alt-right sites together are pulling in about 4.4 million visits a month. Is that a lot? Well, it's much less than the right-wing sites. It's much less than the left-wing sites. However, it's not insignificant. The alt-right audience of about 4.4 million visitors, makes it a larger audience than Commentary Magazine has got, than the Weekly Standard has got. So what I would say is that the alt-right, it's not a huge audience. It's not a formidable voting bloc or anything like that. But the alt-right wants to be a new elite, quote unquote, that develops ideas that get picked up by the rest of the population. And my argument is they are now large enough to to be able to do just that, although they haven't completely displaced other intellectual elites, of course.
Now, your analysis of a website, I assume, assumes that everyone going to the website is sort of a supporter. Do you have any sense, though, of is there a small percentage of people going there who just want to see what the opposition's doing? I mean, I'm a progressive New York Jew. I've been to the Daily Stormer website, the neo-Nazi website, and I don't want to execute myself. So do you have a sense of that? And based on how many supporters you really have, what impact do you think they've had directly on politics today and will have in the future?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First of all, I don't assume that everybody who goes to these sites is a dyed-in-the-wool supporter. I don't know who is and who isn't, right? Of course, we don't know that about people who read magazines. Like in the Woody Allen movies, you see him joking about how he looks at the National Review. So the Woody Allen character was not a National Review follower.
I got to correct you there. He was upset that Diane Keaton, his ex, Annie, was reading National Review. And she says, then she says, why don't you get William F. Buckley to kill the spider? But continue.
That's an excellent point.
Yes.
But at any rate, the point is this. We really don't know who is a diehard follower, who is just looking in. But first of all, these numbers I came up with are correct in terms of visits and unique visitors. We don't know anything about the demographics. We don't know much about the people themselves. However, I would simply point out this. Let's suppose that a lot of the people going to these sites are like you, or like me. They haven't bought into the ideology, or maybe they have, they're mainstream conservatives or whatever. Well, does that mean that we shouldn't count those people? No, because it means that the ideas of the alt-right are getting out, right? And so now people like you and I find ourselves in a situation where we have to respond to that, which is, I wish I didn't have to respond to it. And the theory used to be back in the 60s, don't even mention such people, don't even bring them up. But they've managed to achieve a large enough salience that now people like you and I do have to discuss them. And the result is, even if not everybody is a dyed-in-the-wool follower, the size of the web audience is some measure of the ideology's influence.
So extremist views aren't new. So why does the alt-right merit concern now?
Well, you're right. Extremist views aren't new, but I would say a couple of things. Right? The alt-right has its origins in what used to be called right-wing extremism. Okay, so this was basically people who were to the right of the National Review. Buckley's magazine, it was established in 1955, and not immediately, but fairly early on, Buckley threw out of his magazine overt anti-Semites, overt racists, the John Birch Society, and so forth. This is not necessarily to say that he came up with an ideology that you might like, but he was very concerned to keep extremists out. from extremists from his point of view. Now, these people didn't go away. They hung on by their fingernails. But once you were excluded from the established journals, unless you had the support and unless you had the resources to start your own journal, you were pretty effectively marginalized. And so this right-wing extremist group existed, and by the 80s they were being called the paleo-conservatives. So they existed, and they didn't get anywhere until, as I say, the political shakeups of the early 21st century and the rise of the internet. This creates a situation. Remember, in the early beginning of the 21st century, the people who were running the country were, George W. Bush, the Republicans, centrist conservatives, as they saw themselves. All of a sudden, these shocks to the system shake up that centrist conservative worldview, and at least people on the right start looking for alternatives, and bango, these extremists or paleo-conservatives who have been hanging on by their fingernails for a long time, they've got now a medium by which they can reach this audience, and they achieve the saliency. The other thing I would say is this: the alt-right is much more radical than the John Birch Society. That is no exaggeration. Don't get me wrong. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying something good about the John Birch Society, right? But they would pay at least lip service to the Declaration of Independence. They would pay at least lip service to the idea that, people of all races are equal. Well, of course they wanted to say that. They had to say that because, hey, no conservative is going to attack the Declaration of Independence, right? So, but the alt-right, however, openly attacks the Declaration of Independence, openly proclaims that, there's a certain amount of variation in opinion, but many of them openly proclaim the inferiority of the black race. They attack the Constitution. They attack the United States of America. These folks are anti-American. The old right-wing extremists never said anything like, the United States is so liberal, we just have to, we don't owe alliance to it anymore. So that's what the difference is.
We are talking with Thomas Main, author of The Rise of the Alt-Right. And if you would like to receive a copy of the book for a $50 donation, please pledge to us at 516-620-3602.
Now, Professor, I think your book, The Rise of the Alt-Right, is a very important book. I think all our listeners should buy it and read it. But I must say, your central premise I disagree with, and here's why. The central premise, you seem to be saying that this is sort of new, that the mainstream right wasn't really fundamentally racist before this. I just don't think the historical record bears that out. Barry Goldwater, the Republican nominee in 1964, opposed the Civil Rights Act.
Yes.
Richard Nixon
in my book, by the way.
Yeah, Richard Nixon in 1968 ran on an explicit Southern strategy. Just 8 years after courting Dr. King to try to get his support in 1960, ran on a clearly anti-black policy. Ronald Reagan, when he kicked off his campaign in 1980, spoke a few miles away from where Turner, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were killed, and praised states' rights, which was a repudiation. And then George Herbert Walker Bush ran on the Willie Horton ads, which I think most people would say was explicitly racist. So don't you think a fundamental core of the Republican appeal for a few decades has been really dog whistle racism?
Well, what I would say is, first of all, I don't say anywhere in my book that mainstream conservatism was completely non-racist or completely purged itself of racism. Now, one could get into a discussion of, gee whiz, just how bad were the, in terms of racism, in terms of reactionary politics, how bad was mainstream conservatism? And we could go on and have that debate for a long time. All I have to say is this. You decide, where you want to locate so-called mainstream conservatism, of the mainstream of the Republican Party. Let's call it. Eventually, it became Reaganism. You locate that anywhere you want on the spectrum of objectionableness on the scale of reactionary politics. You put them where you want to. If you want to say, well, they were conservative, but, a legitimate form of conservatism, fine. If you want to say, oh, no, there's an element of racism to it all the way through, fine. You say that. You put them anywhere you want in that scale. The alt-right is light years to the right of that, right? Which is, so, this is not to be interpreted as an apology for centrist conservatism, but I think it's true. For instance, centrist conservatism never, explicitly stepped forward and said, the Declaration of Independence, it's wrong. All people are not created equal. The mainstream conservatism never said, the Constitutional Convention was a coup d'etat against the old republic, and people like Washington and Alexander Hamilton were usurpers who imposed a Jewish-based constitution on the United States. So this, don't get me wrong, in attacking the alt-right and in locating them to the right and in identifying their ideology as a radical repudiation of liberal democracy, I'm not necessarily telling you that you have to like centrist conservatives. You put them anywhere you want.
Well, again, I'm challenging the term. I'm challenging the term.
A different beast now.
I'm challenging the term centrist, and just two specific points. Reagan repeatedly referred to young African Americans as strapping bucks getting food stamps, and he visited Bitburg. He visited the site of SS graves, stormtrooper Nazi graves, and basically said they were victims too, fighting for their own country. How isn't that any less vile and racist? And he was siding with the enemies of the United States against the United States. Isn't that the same thing as undermining the idea of patriotism? Not to mention implicitly siding with the South, which was against the Constitution, obviously.
Well, all I can tell you is, I'm familiar with all of this material. Okay, and I've looked very carefully at the alt-right sites. Okay, I've looked at them with their caricatures of Jews and blacks. I've looked at them where they say that we need a fascist coup to destroy democracy. I've looked at their open attacks on the Declaration of Independence. I've looked at their open attacks on black equality. My interpretation of this is say anything you want to about the so-called mainstream conservatives, all right? You can hate them, you can like them, you can be indifferent to them. My only point is the alt-right is something rather different. It's more radical. And by the way, I think it's dangerous to argue things like, the Daily Stormer with, the Nazi memes and the caricatures of Jews and their calls for destroying the Declaration of Independence, that's all the same thing as Ronald Reagan. Come on, let's say. Now, I think if you do that, then what's going to happen is the people who still have warm feelings about Ronald Reagan, all of a sudden going to say, oh, the alt-right's no worse than that. And so you will have succeeded not in marginalizing the alt-right, but you will have succeeded in moving them towards the mainstream. So, listen, once again, I just want to make it clear. You can say anything you want to about so-called mainstream conservatism, right? You're very unsympathetic with it. I'm pretty unsympathetic with it, okay?
I just think the term's an oxymoron. That's like saying mainstream Marxism.
Say what?
I think the term is an oxymoron. That's like saying mainstream Marxism.
Yeah. By the way, there is such a thing as mainstream Marxism. That's like
in Cuba, maybe
the democracy, and then there are people like Mao and Trotsky who are more radical. Yeah. I don't understand what your objection is.
I object. The whole point is mainstreaming a far-right ideology, which, compared to every other industrialized Western democracy, would be considered a far-right ideology. Just because they took power, that doesn't mean it's mainstream.
Look, I think we've thrashed this out as much as we can. I don't mean to be entering a defense of mainstream conservatism. My only point here is that, based on my research, I think the alt-right is something new, more radical, and particularly dangerous.
And we've got only a few minutes left. And what's interesting is in the book you indicate that it was a perfect storm of social, political, and technological change that helped crystallize the alt-right's place in American culture. So what's next? What's on the horizon? And give us a prediction.
Well, it's hard to say. There is some talk about how the alt-right has lost some support as a result of the incidents at Charlottesville where a counter demonstrator was killed, and then they tried to have a follow-up to the Charlottesville demonstration and nobody showed up. So, and if you go to alt-right websites, they talk about the crisis of the movement and so forth. I'm skeptical. I think that what's happening is many of the ideas of the alt-right are slowly beginning to permeate into mainstream American political culture. Right, the idea that truth is entirely subjective, and that every group has got its own truth, and that they fight, and the only point at issue is whose truth wins. The idea that politics is entirely a matter of war, and the only question is can our group beat the other groups. Corrosive skepticism about all the main features of liberal democracy. Even a support for secession, which the alt-right is in favor of. So I see these ideas slowly seeping into the American political mainstream, and I think that what has to happen is writers, intellectuals especially, have to come together, have to rebut this new form of anti-democratic ideology, and bring about a revival of the full range of liberal democratic thought, going from all the way from the legitimate right all the way to the legitimate left, and pushing out any kind of anti-democratic ideology.
So, Professor Main, as we wrap up, how can people learn more about you and the book?
Okay, you can go to my website, which is at www.baruch.cuny.edu, MSPIA, that's the faculty I'm on. And if you want to buy the book, you can go to www.brookings.edu/book/The Rise of the Alt-Right.
Professor Main, thank you so much for joining us today here on City Watch.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation and we have piqued your interest about the book, The Rise of the Alt-Right, it is one of our items today that you can donate to WBAI and receive a copy. The publisher, Brookings Press, has given us 5 copies. Go to give2wbai.org or call our pledge line at 516-620-3602 and pledge. Please pledge. Remember, we are listener supported, and we count on your contributions. And of course, we count on your listenership as well. Joel?
Yes, I just want to clarify one thing. I wasn't saying Ronald Reagan was a Nazi. All I was saying, a factually, historically accurate point, he honored Nazi stormtroopers. That's not the same as saying he's a Nazi. Now, on that point, please do give to WBAI. Most of you listening probably have cable TV. You pay for that. Yeah, BAI gets no government funds, so when you're listening to other public radio, that's funded by your tax dollars. Most of you, or many of you, either have a paper subscription to a newspaper or pay to access it online. Just because we're not charging you up front does not mean you shouldn't pay for this vital service that you are getting that you can hear nowhere else. So we're good cop, bad cop, but Jeff's always the good cop, I'm the bad cop. And Sean here, great engineer, is the referee. But call in to WBAI 516-620-3602 or go to our website, give to WBAI.org. Do not be a progressive free media freeloader. Pony up the bucks, even if you're not well off. Whatever you can afford. Jeff and I are working for free, but the transmitter costs money. The rent here costs money. You must pay to hear this message.
And I'm in awe of your memory of a specific line or two. I'm never good at this, from Annie Hall, but want to remind you of another line. I really wanted to be an anarchist, but I didn't know where to register.
There you go. And I saw Annie Hall many, many times before I knew the horrible things Woody Allen has done. And so you're just not going to hear a serious discussion and a back and forth where people can agree to disagree about the alt-right any place else in American media, even other progressive media. It's Russia, Russia, Russia all the time. Yes, we know, Trump conspired with Russia, but how about all the other things affecting Americans? And where else can you learn how to fight back? And where else can you get these amazing premiums Jeff's about to announce? Look at this. We're broadcast professionals now with segues.
You know what? Before I want to come back to this because I do want to go see the movie that you mentioned that is one of the premiums, the Moynihan, the movie. What was your favorite moment in the movie?
Favorite moment in the movie was when at the end he was showing how to tie a bow tie because he thought no one else would understand how to tie a bow tie. The most instructive debate was over the so-called Moynihan Report, which described the need for massive government intervention to help African American families, but was predicated on the fact that there was disruption in the African American family household. And many people at the time either thought that was racist or was giving sort of aid and comfort to the right-wing enemy by blaming the victim, so to speak, although the movie claims Moynihan's widow has her saying that Martin Luther King called her husband and said he supported the report, although he could not say that in public. And a lot of people who've read the report in retrospect, including Natasha Coates, have said it was misinterpreted. So it gets a little wonkish, but it's a fascinating debate about place, race, and class, and whether two words out of a lengthy report can be taken out of context. So it's extraordinarily relevant to the debate today. Moynihan, the movie at the Film Forum, which you can get for free for just a $50 donation to us at BAI.
You are listening to me, Jeff Simmons, and my fired up co-host, Joel Berg, on City Watch, WBAI, New York 99.5 FM, and streaming live at WBAI.org. And hopefully in a few minutes, we will have our second guest coming up. But in the second hour of this special edition of City Watch, we will be taking some listener phone calls. And that number to call in, and we'll give you the time before we hit 11 o'clock. The number to call will be 347-335-0818. Sean is anxious and ready to take your phone calls in the second hour.
At least ready.
At least ready.
And just one more thing, since I got to continue, that in 1972, George Wallace, on the Democratic Party line, won primaries in North Carolina, Tennessee, Maryland, Florida, and Michigan on a thoroughly racist, platform on the Democratic Party line. That was the last time I think the Democratic Party had an explicit, really huge vein of explicit racism in it, although there's still structural racism everywhere. So again, I push back against any narrative that sort of hatred is brand new on the American scene. We have our next guest here. This morning. He's actually live in the studio. It's always exciting when people wake up early to come with us in the studio. We have Brown University professor of political science, Corey Brettschneider. I pronounced your last name correct?
Brettschneider, but close enough.
Close enough. Author of the new book, The Oath and the Office, A Guide to the Constitution for Future Presidents. He'll discuss why this is an essential guide to the presidential powers and limits of the Constitution. Yes, there are limits in the Constitution for anyone voting or running for our highest office. So welcome to City Watch, Professor.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. And it's not that early, 10:30. I'm happy to get up for this.
That's right. On Friday, I have a radio show that starts at 6 a.m. So this is not
we did have one guest maybe a few months ago that kind of overslept.
Oh, okay.
And I do point out every time I go to work very early, there are people already working far earlier than me, right. Construction workers, nurses, etc. Yeah. So tell us, Professor, about the main themes of your book, The Oath and the Office, A Guide to the Constitution for Future Presidents.
As you touched upon from the beginning, I think for our current time, what really matters about the book is the limits on the presidency. And the book is an argument for sort of reclaiming the limits on what a president can do when it comes to, for instance, the Bill of Rights, the respect for free speech, the rule of law, a lot of things that would have been obvious, I guess, before the Trump presidency, but that now have come into question. But the book is also about the fact, it's partly about Trump and it's motivated by thinking about Trump, but it's also trying to take a broad view of the Constitution and to look at why some of the things that he's doing are precedented, that there is a history of it. He's not the first racist president, for instance. Woodrow Wilson probably is one of the most prominent people in that direction. So that's the idea, is to look at the limits on the presidency, of course, to look at the Trump presidency, but also to look beyond it.
What do you think all presidents should know about the Constitution?
Well, I mean, the book is called The Oath in the Office for a reason. It starts with the idea in Article 2 that you have to say some very specific words the first literally the first second, I should say, in office. And what the oath requires a president to do is to promise to preserve, protect, and defend not the country, but the Constitution of the United States. So from the beginning, the idea is about the limits. And to me, the sort of hero of the book is, I criticize him, of course, for his views on race and his views on slavery, but the hero in the sense of the limited presidency is George Washington's second inaugural specifically. And what he says there is, look, I just took the oath of office. He's saying it to mostly members of Congress in a very small room in Philadelphia, which you could still visit. And he says, I just took the oath of office, but if I violate it, it's your job, the people assembled here, to upbraid me, criticize me, and also subject me to constitutional punishment. And so that's really the sort of message of the book, that Washington isn't just speaking to the people who are there. He's speaking to all of us right now when we have a president who not only disregards the Constitution, but doesn't know anything about it and has a disposition to really oppose it in his basic, his disposition, I think, is oppositional to the basic ideals of the Constitution.
And for you youngins listening out there who may only know history through Hamilton, just for the record, George Washington was not an African-American man with an amazing singing voice. No, he was a racist slaveholder and a great patriot at the same time, right, showing throughout our history the contradictions baked into this. Now, you recently said, I saw you on Morning Joe, a slightly less watched or listened to entity than City Watch. You said Trump was putting the Constitution through a stress test. That's a very vivid image. What did you mean by that?
Look, we would like to think that I could write this book about the limits of the presidency and it would be self-executing. But part of the point of the book is that's not how it works. There is no Constitution police. It's not like just because we have this document, it's going to all of a sudden appear. We have to rely on a Supreme Court partly to stop him, which unfortunately did not happen, for instance, in the travel ban case, although it should have. And ultimately, the point of the book is the reason why it's written, of course, for future presidents, but most people will not be presidents, sorry to break it. It's written for all of us. And the idea is that when we vote for a president, when we participate in politics, that's the place where the Constitution's enforcement and the limits on the presidency, the guarantees of the Bill of Rights have to be realized.
So if Joel wants to run for president, what are the steps he needs to take? Give him some guidance.
Get off BAI.
Yeah. I mean, the structure of the book kind of follows the basics of what you need to know. It begins with the oath, which calls our attention to Article 2. And what Article 2 does is it actually creates the presidency. In the Article 1 creates the Congress, Article 2 the presidency. And the basic idea there is you have to look for delegated powers. So the president can do certain things, he can't do certain things. So take the war power, for instance. The president is commander-in-chief, but the president cannot declare or initiate war. That's very deliberate. It breaks up the war power from the monarch in England, where initiating and carrying out all of those things were consolidated into one kingly or prerogative power. And so the break there. It looks at the difference between making the law and executing the law. It looks at hiring and firing. Sorry to break it to you, if you become president of the United States, I say you certainly would be violating your oath if you fire the person looking into you. We could talk more about that. Unfortunately, the current setup Congress, because it's abdicated its responsibility to protect the special prosecutor, that is one of the places in the stress test where the president might be able to fire Mueller without being stopped by a court, for instance. And so sometimes I say the way to fix the stress test is to have legislation that would repair it. And then I look at the Bill of Rights. You need to know, for instance, that you can't imprison your opponents, even though John Adams did precisely that with the Alien and Sedition Acts, the help of Congress. I talk about the need for the president sometimes to respect rights that will be enforced by the court, like free speech, but also to go beyond it. So in the case of torture, for instance, the Supreme Court has never, and won't in the near future certainly, say that a president is prohibited from torture. But the president has the obligation to not do it.
You are listening to Corey Brettschneider, author of the new book, The Oath and the Office, A Guide to the Constitution for Future Presidents. Joel?
So a lot of people on the right claim to be strict constructionalists, and my argument is that's sort of bogus.
Yeah.
When I was meeting with a senior aide to a congressperson, they said, "Oh, the federal nutrition programs might be unconstitutional because they're not specifically mentioned in the Constitution." And I said, "Well, the Air Force isn't mentioned in the Constitution. Is that?" They said, "Well, it says to provide for the general defense," and I said, "Well, it also says to promote the general welfare."
Sure.
And so you alluded to the president's power to hire or fire someone from the executive branch, but isn't that like half a line in one sentence about whether you'd even have employees of the executive branch?
Well, I say in the book exactly that I reject what some people call strict constructionism or originalism or original meaning. There are a variety of meanings, variety of terms for that idea that you're expressing. And here's the kind of main example I give in arguing against that interpretation of the Constitution. The right of judicial review of courts to strike down legislation, that's not found in the Constitution. So what I say is that the Constitution is primarily, in some instances, yes, the text can answer questions for us, like how old do you have to be president? That's laid out. That's not controversial. But in many, many areas, what the Constitution does is provide a set of values that then have to be interpreted over time by courts and by all of us. So, yes, the general welfare, and it's not just the text there, it's also the case law supports the idea that the Constitution does protect certain rights, but they're not the libertarian economic rights that people thought existed in the Constitution in the early 20th century. And after the New Deal, the consensus among scholars has been that certainly the Congress has not just the ability, but the obligation to provide for the general welfare, including the program that you're talking about. So people who try to trick you with this sort of language of textualism or strict constructionalism don't buy into it.
And it's interesting because just yesterday, former Vice President Joe Biden accused Trump of, quote, trashing American values. And it's interesting in the book, if the president has a duty to promote values embodied in the Constitution, give us an example of a president who you feel did that and is held up as a role model for embodying the values in the Constitution.
Well, I've been focused on limits and the bad ones, but I'd go back to Washington, certainly the attention to the oath. And also, when you look at the war powers, for instance, which is one of the real, there are many problems with our current consensus about what the Constitution requires. But that was a president who really understood that when it came to the declaration of war, that you couldn't just go off and start and initiate war. So I think that's one example. If we go into the 20th century, I think the truth is that presidents have been sometimes good and sometimes bad on these issues. So I think FDR, when it comes to the provision of the general welfare, was a terrific president. The creation of the New Deal, the end of the mistaken idea that the Constitution is primarily a protection of property rights that would preclude promotion of the general welfare. But he also did some bad stuff too, and the court stopped him in appropriate ways. So when it came to hiring and firing, he tried to fire the head of the Federal Trade Commission, and he said basically, this guy's not on board with my politics and I don't want him around. Now there was legislation passed by Congress that said you can't hire and fire as you will if you're president, that there are some agencies that are going to have independent protection. And even though FDR basically was stopped by the courts there, in a way I think the lesson for us was a deeper one, which is that even when a president is pursuing social goods like the general welfare, he's also going to be stopped by legislation. And that's a lesson that we need to learn, I think, in the Mueller case, for instance.
And that's relevant today because just the other day, President Trump implied that he had the power to fire and hire members of the Federal Reserve Board who are in a fixed term. But you mentioned the
exactly.
courts holding Roosevelt in check, but arguably, I think most people would say his worst decision was the internment of Japanese Americans, and the Supreme Court was just okie dokie with that.
Yeah, I mean, the Korematsu decision, as I say in the section on equal protection, is one of many stains on our, probably I'd put it in the top 5 stains on the legacy of the Constitution. It was a decision, too, that the court had the opportunity to correct in the travel ban case, which really raised similar issues of whether or not you could basically use ethnic and racial discrimination in order to blatantly discriminate against people when there was a national security risk. Now, what Korematsu said is basically the president's power is near unlimited when it comes to, is so important that even when it comes to equal protection, he can do what he wants. We have to defer. And I fought very hard in the travel ban case to say, look, they need to flip that case on its head and say, no, a president is limited when it comes to outright racism, especially if there isn't a real rationale for a policy. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, they did something very strange. They overturned Korematsu formally. They said we were wrong, just like you did, and then they upheld the travel ban case. So it was a real insult, I think, to American democracy.
So what can people do to influence the nation's highest office in the coming years?
I think, what I'm trying to do with the book is to create a national conversation about the limits of the Constitution that isn't just for legal scholars and isn't just for law professors, certainly, but is something that all of us start to think about, the kind of vision of the Constitution that we want, and that when we elect presidents, certainly when we elect members of Congress, that's front and center. That's just been heightened by this disastrous confirmation hearings of Justice Kavanaugh, unfortunately, where you really saw somebody who is more of an operative rather than a serious devotee, I think, of the Constitution, blatantly confirmed to the court despite his obvious partisanship. And so, how do you take care of that? It's not going to be the court itself. It's going to have to come from all of us and from elections and from putting this conversation front and center.
I think that's a vital point, that the courts and our checks and balances are only as strong as the populace.
Right.
My mother said many things, not all of which made perfect sense, God bless her soul, but one time the Supreme Court did something and she said, they can't do that, it's unconstitutional, so it can't happen. I said, Mom, they decide.
Yeah.
And so they've done some horrible things, Dred Scott, where they've rated an African-American not a human being, Plessy versus Ferguson. Right. They've opposed, they support the Japanese internment. On the other hand, they did do Brown versus Board of Education.
Yeah.
They did leapfrog over state legislatures by saying that it is a constitutional right for people to marry who they love. But isn't a lot of that they were going where the people were?
I think sometimes the court leads. I mean, Martin Luther King, when you surveyed people in the 1950s about his popularity, he wasn't like he is now. He was seen as a controversial figure. And so Brown was a unanimous decision, but certainly the court was leading well beyond where most of the American South was at that point. Rights of criminal defendants, I think, during the Warren Court era, the right of the indigent to an attorney, all of those things are things where I don't think if you polled people, it would have polled well, and yet the court in those cases did the right thing. But as you say, quite rightly, and as I say in the book, you can't leave the interpretation of the Constitution to the courts. And that's why the device of talking to a future president is important, because it suggests, it's not just that you read court decisions and that's going to answer it. A president, or all of us, really, the citizens who are going to elect one, have to look to the Constitution itself. So, and when the court really gets it wrong, you don't just accept it. You fight back.
We have in studio author Corey Brettschneider of The Oath and the Office, a Guide to the Constitution for Future Presidents. Kirkus called it a clear-eyed, accessible, and informative primer, vital reading for all Americans. We've got a few minutes left. Parting thoughts. Is there a sequel?
I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but certainly a focus on the Supreme Court at this point in time, I think, is called for, and especially a Supreme Court that... I'm not willing to give up on it. There still are these fundamental rights. We rely on it to protect, us from a president who would want to shut down protest and free speech. But certainly Citizens United, we can go through a lot of other decisions where the courts have gone wrong, and we need to take the Constitution back from them, I think.
And Earl Warren was a party hack functionary. He was chair of the California Republican Party. He did some dirty tricks on behalf of the Republican Party, and he became this great liberal icon who the Southern racists wanted to impeach. So the question today is whether someone starts out like a party functionary, like a Kavanaugh with a lifetime job, will ever evolve, or whether that's a thing of the past.
Yeah, I mean, Warren, just to add to what you said, also participated in the roundup of Japanese Americans as governor of California, and so he was on the bad side of Korematsu. And as you say, turned into a real liberal hero. Kavanaugh, I wish I could tell you that I think that there's going to be a wonderful evolution, but I wouldn't trust it. I mean, the record is so bad on executive power in particular, and his disposition, let's say, or temperament during the hearings was so awful that he really revealed himself to be a justice, I think, of a kind that I wouldn't count on evolving. And more than that, the Congress has the ability to impeach Supreme Court justices, and if it turned out that he lied multiple times in that hearing, I think that's something that we have to look into too.
Right, and I don't want to give any impression I was defending him. So thank you, Professor,
my pleasure.
So much. And we recommend the book, The Oath in the Office, A Guide to the Constitution for Future Presidents.
Nice to stop by.
Tell us your website.
Check it out on www.CoreyBrettschneider.com. You can buy it also in local bookstores. I know Book Culture has it in New York, and then Barnes & Noble's has them. It's in the window on the Upper West Side. So visit your local bookstore. You could buy it on Amazon or visit my website. We have lots of places to buy it there, too.
And I saw you have some readings coming up out of town. Any scheduled in the New York City area?
To be continued, hopefully. Nothing.
Check out your website. You'll see all your comings and goings.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure, guys. Okay.
So you are listening to City Watch, a special 2-hour edition today. As we are about to head into our second hour, we're going to bring up a third guest in just a short while from Flushing Town Hall. But we do have a few items today that if you call and pledge, you'll be able to get them as gifts. One that we had mentioned in the first half of the show was The Rise of the Alt-Right, a book by Professor Thomas Main from Baruch College about the rise of the alt-right. And we also have tickets to several shows at Flushing Town Hall that our next guest will talk about shortly. But just to tell you a little about it, Flushing Town Hall, where I have done some PR for the last few years, brings performances from across the globe to Queens. And often these are acts that you won't necessarily see anywhere else in New York City. The number to call for our WBAI pledge line is 516-620-3602, or go online at give2, that's the number 2, WBAI.org.
And I point out again that you need to support not only with your ears but with your dollars this public-oriented programming, non-corporate programming. Abby Hoffman once said the only thing worse than a press that's censored is one that doesn't need to be. And so much of the press out there doesn't need to be, because it's just the corporate support of the horrible, horrible status quo. Information is power. So many people from BAI learn about protests, learn about seminars, learn about the facts they need to argue with their right-wing uncle over Thanksgiving through BAI. How much are you willing to pay for that? And conversely, are you willing to contemplate a future where there was no BAI? I don't want to be apocalyptic, but the truth is the station has significantly downsized in recent years. It's relying on many more volunteers, and that can't go on forever. And transmitter owners do not take IOUs for transmitter payments. So there is a possibility this thing you rely on, this station you've grown up with, could go away, unless you call in to 516-620-3602 or go to www.give2bai.org. Now, if your last name is Gates or Soros or Bezos, give a few billion.
Yeah, but I was going to say more than $5 a month.
Even if you can give $50 to get these great Moynihan tickets, do it.
Yeah, and unlike commercial radio, there's no deep well of corporate support to keep us on the air. We rely on our listeners. WBAI is part of the Pacific Radio Network. We're non-commercial. We are listener-supported, and a number of our hosts have received prominent awards over the years as well. We have a very good range of programming throughout the year.
Absolutely. There's music, there's talk, there's news, and things you're just not going to hear elsewhere. So I know you come on here to be educated and to be entertained, not to be browbeaten, but tough. This is your time to get browbeaten in a polite way. You can feel really good about yourself by even a small donation. The good news is, because the budget of BAI is so small, because so much of it's powered by volunteers, even a relatively small donation goes a huge way. So don't think that if you can't give $1 billion, it's not useless. 50, 100, 200 goes a huge way to keep the lights on, to keep the signal on.
So I'm trying to call up a story right now I wanted to ask you about, Joel, that I had read in the New York Times this morning. Of course, I'm not finding it right away, but I will, about the president being out there a lot more over this past weekend. Well, I'm sure you have an opinion on this.
Well, you know me, I don't really have opinions on much. But first of all, there's a whole issue, is he violating the law? Most of these are not described as political trips. Most of these are described as political, as governmental trips, and not to get too deep into the weeds, but under federal law, there is a huge distinction whether the trip's main purpose is to elect candidates or the trip's main purpose is to carry out government business. And why this matters is hundreds of thousands of dollars and perhaps millions of dollars are spent each trip on our tax dollars paying for Air Force One, our tax dollars paying for the Secret Service. Now, if it was listed as a political trip, a campaign trip, which most of these clearly are, he's endorsing candidates, then the Secret Service would still, of course, protect the president. He'd still travel in Air Force One, but his campaign or the Republican National Committee would reimburse the American tax. So there's one, the ethical issue, and I believe he's clearly violating the law over and over and over again, getting our tax dollars to support his political plans. Two, there's the issue, he never friggin' goes anywhere to speak to anyone who doesn't love him. You know, I worked for a president who lost many states, and he visited the states he lost.
So we're not getting him in here in studio.
Mr. President, if you're listening, if you can break away from Fox to listen to BAI, you're welcome here any time. I won't say that I won't bring 1 million protesters with us outside, but you're welcome here. So the second question, he never talks to anyone, God forbid, listens to anyone who doesn't agree with him. And the third thing, right, is that basically these are racist, sexist rallies saying, white men are the most oppressed people on the planet in fear of their lives. And their political strategies clearly, to the extent there is a political strategy beyond just his hyper narcissism, is that they think this is what won them the first time, when in fact what won them the first time was not only their fired up racist, misogynist base, but a lot of swing voters, in particular suburban white women, who said, well, I'm not comfortable with this, but I don't like Hillary. How bad could he be? And I think they're very mistaken if they think the same strategy is going to work. It may work in North Dakota. It's certainly not going to work in Philadelphia suburbs.
So,
what do you think?
Well, I'm also, as you know, Joel, I'm a former reporter. So if I were still a reporter, I'd be loving this. I'd be loving the fact that I never knew. I could not predict what he was going to say. What I'm enjoying about the New York Times piece is how they, throughout the article, correct a number of the statements that he made.
But most of his speech is the same thing he's been saying for a few years. And people, even his diehards, are getting bored of that. Fox just recently did not run an entire one of his rallies
because they're so used to this.
Right. So if you're Donald Trump and you're losing Fox, you're in trouble.
But you're not losing WBAI because we're going to keep tracking him.
Yes, I'm sure he'll keep listening to this because he so wants opposing views.
There is a number I want our listeners to write down right now because after our next guest, who we'll have on shortly, we will be opening up our phone lines for our listeners, and that number you'll be able to call between 11 and 12, starting probably about 11:15, will be 347-335-0818. But also remember this other number. It is the Fall Fund Drive here at WBAI, and the pledge number is 516-620-3602, or you go online to give to the number 2, WBAI.org.
Now, I also know from my fundraising hat running a nonprofit that what I previously did, berate callers for not supporting us, is probably the worst thing to do. So what I want to switch is honor all of you who do support us, and thank you from the bottom of our collective hearts for supporting us. Every dollar really matters. Every dollar helps keep the resistance on air. Every dollar you can contribute by calling 516-620-3602. or by texting the letters WBAI to the number 41444, or by going online to www.give2wbai.org. Just that simple act can make a huge difference in the resistance. And donations to BAI are tax deductible. I know many of you are generously donating to the candidates of your choice, but those donations are not tax deductible. Donations to WBAI are tax deductible. And do you want a media institution on the air in New York and streaming live throughout the country that you can download anyone you want, anytime you want, to give you the tools to fight the racism of the Trump era? Do you want to support this tool that helps you fight the Islamophobia of the Trump era? Do you want to keep this tool on the air that helps you fight against the homophobia of the Trump era? Do you want to help keep on the air this critical voice that fights the misogyny of the Trump era? Not all of you have the ability to have a radio show to speak out, so by supporting us, you support this greater community to do this, and you get great perks, as Jeff was talking about: concert tickets, books, fascinating movie tickets. So you get to help save the world and get something good for yourself and get a tax deduction. That's the ultimate win-win-win.
Joel, what do you like the most about being on WBAI?
I like the most about being on WBAI that the fact that never once has station management told me what I can and cannot say. And that's the only workplace I've ever been in my entire few decades career where that's the case. Now, the FCC has a few rules of what we can and cannot say, and we have a list here. And by the way, some of you may know that the famous 7 dirty words you can't say.
What are they?
I can't say them on radio. Was a BAI case that BAI was in court over the fact that a BAI DJ played a George Carlin routine about those words, and ultimately the courts ruled against BAI. But that's how long and that's how fearless WBAI has been in the fight for social justice and the fight for freedom of speech. What do you like best?
I like the fact that we've had, and I'm not joshing you, I like the fact that we've had a number of interesting guests since I started doing this. I am naturally a curious person. That's why I became a reporter very early on. I mean, well, even before becoming a reporter, I delivered newspapers as a kid. Right. As a reporter, I love the researching, but more than that, it was just talking with people and finding out what made them tick.
Right. The best interviews are when the interviewer really wants to meet and really wants to get to know and really wants to hear what the interviewee has to say, right? And the best questions are questions that you're personally curious about getting answered.
You know, there were so many occasions as a reporter where, I would repeat the same question several times, kind of phrasing it a little differently, just because I could tell that they were ducking. Especially with politicians. Right. They're giving you the canned answer. But just gnawing at them until they realize, okay, I'm not getting away with this. I need to answer genuinely. A lot of times they wouldn't, but, it wasn't a gotcha moment. It was just be honest.
and the diversity we're allowed to have here. On this 2-hour show, you're going to hear Reyna Grande, a great Mexican-American author, talking about her immigrant experience. You've heard two men, talking about the Constitution and the rise of the alt-right. We're about to hear about a fantastic cultural institution in Queens. You're just not going to hear that diversity of opinion, that diversity of culture anywhere else. And do you want to send the message beyond just the concrete act of helping the station stay on the air? Do you want to send the message that diversity is important, cultural programming combined with politics is important, and that it's important to you? It's important to you that this independent voice stay on the air. And, even if you want to hate call us, if you're a right-winger out there and want to have a good opportunity to have some station to hate listen to, then by all means, if you're a right-winger, you want to split up your mega checks with your BAI checks. And if you want someplace to really piss you off by talking about things like intersectionalism and other words that will make your head explode, give money just so you'll have us as a piñata.
So we have, in a few moments, we're going to have one of our guests. We'll be able to talk about some of the concert tickets to several different events at Flushing Town Hall. And we now have our third guest of the day. Remember, we're going into our second hour of City Watch. You are listening to WBAI.org. And it is our WBAI Pledge Drive. Our next guest is Sami Shumays, the Deputy Director of Flushing Town Hall. As I mentioned earlier, this is a venue I've been helping out with publicity for several years. And even though I attend concerts for work, I thoroughly enjoy going to a number of other presentations that they do throughout the year, because you never know what you're going to get. And it is just it's an intimate setting. And, if you hear the name Flushing in its title, you might immediately think, okay, it's just a specific type of programming. Well, it is not. Joining us is Sami Shumays. Welcome to the show, Sami.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for what you said. It's really great to hear how much you appreciate our programming.
Because I never I never tell you.
No, you do actually tell us. But thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here on WBAI.
So first, just start off by telling Joel and I a little about Flushing Town Hall and what you do.
Sure. So Flushing Town Hall is a multidisciplinary arts institution, meaning we do all kinds of artistic disciplines: music, dance, theater. We have an art gallery. We're based in a historic building built in 1862 out in Flushing, Queens. We do a lot of educational programs. So we do a lot of different kinds of programs, but then the other aspect of what we do is that we do a lot of different cultural variety. You could put it that way, or you could call it diversity. Our mission has been since 1979 to represent cultures from all over the world on our stage on an equal footing. So although our mission is super broad in terms of really welcoming in the different communities that make Queens their home, we certainly do an awful lot of jazz, Chinese programming, Korean programming, Latinx programming. We're building up our South Asian programming. But we do a lot of things like global mashups, where we're bringing in music from completely different countries from all over the world, like Haiti meets China or Korea meets Greece. So that's a little snapshot of what we do. In terms of myself, at Flushing Town Hall, I have almost no responsibility for any of the programming decisions. I'm involved in the government relations and board relations and the HR and all the fun stuff on the back end that helps to make the organization run.
So you're the glamourless person who makes everything run while other people get the time. But so let me say this too: if you go to Flushing Town Hall, you can make it a twofer. In addition to getting your world-class cultural programming, you can stop in, I would argue, the single greatest food neighborhood in the entire United States based on quality and diversity. So in addition to that,
That's absolutely right.
You're also a performer?
I am. I'm a musician. I do Arabic music, specifically music from Egypt and Syria, with my ensemble called Zikrayat.
Is it Arabic? Is it Arabic classical music?
Well, that's a big question. So classical is kind of an awkward word to use. We definitely do a mix of what you might call urban art traditions, which would be the closest equivalent to classical, as well as folkloric music from Egypt and Syria, as well as one of the specialties that we do is music from Egyptian film musicals, which would be like the equivalent of Bollywood music or musical music from the U.S. So we do a range, as well as some Egyptian pop and some Lebanese pop. So we do a range of music from the Middle East performing here, as well as dance.
You do Farouz and covers. Anyway, that's an inside joke. She's a great champion of Lebanese. Kulthum, the great singer from Egypt. My only point is, if listeners have never heard this kind of music, if you didn't grow up, it's among the most fantastic music on the planet to hear live.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And Kulthum, what's interesting, a lot of people don't know about Arabic music, but Kulthum is the second most recorded artist in the world. She has more recordings, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, than Elvis or Frank Sinatra, and is second only to the Indian playback singer Lata Mangeshkar. So it's an incredibly vibrant music tradition, especially in the Arab world and in other parts of the world.
And she was an Egyptian woman, pop star and movie star, and a few million people came to her funeral. It was a national holiday, I believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Sami, I should have asked this before, but next time we have you on the show, or have anyone from Flushing Town Hall, I'll ask you in advance for some of your music, so our listeners can actually then hear your performance. One thing that I found interesting from the time I started working with you was and it is kind of humorous, about the misperception that some people have when they hear Flushing Town Hall, that your executive and artistic director, Ellen Kodadek, has talked with me about. Tell me about that misperception.
Well, there's a misperception that we're really, there's actually two misperceptions. One is that we're a town hall, like a government building. People hear that, they think, so we get a lot of people walking in the door asking for marriage licenses and their birth records, and we have to send them to Borough Hall in Queens. So that's a big misperception. We were, of course, originally actually a town hall back in 1862, before we retransformed the facility into a cultural facility.
And you were a jail.
And the other
you were a jail at one point, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We have a courthouse and a jail cell in it. And then the other misperception, I think, is that people think, based on the name, that we only serve Flushing. And in fact, although we are based right in downtown Flushing, our education programs serve every district in Queens, and our audiences come from all over Queens and all over the city. And our programming has a global perspective, and especially a perspective that's Queens wide, and really trying to celebrate, Queens, which has 168 languages and so many different cultural groups. So our programs really are broader than Flushing, but we're constantly trying to tell that message to folks.
So not to tell you how to do your job or give you an unsolicited suggestion, but how about changing the name to the Global Performing Arts Center, the Queens Global Performing Arts Center? Not let you ask, but tell me what.
Yeah, I mean, we could. We talk about that every few years. The issues with changing a name is obviously you have to go through a major branding campaign and spend lots of money and redo everything that you're doing and go through legal. It's an enormous process. It's one that we've certainly thought about, but I think our organizational capacity at this particular moment.
I run a nonprofit, and we changed our name. It only cost us a few $1,000s. So anyway, tell us about what you have on tap for the rest of the season. What exciting things people can see at Flushing Town Hall, which is really a performance arts center, not a town hall or a jail.
Yes. Well, we have a lot of great jazz and world music coming up. Our big highlight jazz program is the NEA Jazz Masters on November 16th. But we're actually premiering a new jazz pilot that I want to talk about to folks, which is we're trying a hot club. And hot clubs are a jazz listening session, and these days they're especially about listening to jazz on the original 78 RPM records. And so we're doing our first Jazz Hot Club on November 3rd, Saturday, November 3rd at 12:30 p.m. That's on our website. That should be a really interesting kind of experiment, because what we do a lot is live performance, and this will be our first time trying to do actually just a listening session. Jeff, I hate to admit it on air, but I kind of got unprepared because of some changes of plans in the morning. Can you remind me?
Of course I will.
On air.
I kept.
Can you remind me about some of the programs that we're giving the tickets away for today?
Not a problem at all. In fact, I have it here because I've been mentioning some of them during the show. One is FEI Music, a fusion music concert on Sunday, December 2nd, where you're going to hear music.
Right, and that's.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's led by Fei Fei Yang, who's a really fantastic erhu player, which is a Chinese instrument. But she does a really interesting fusion with some different kinds of Western instruments.
And that is Sunday, December 2nd. And if you pledge today to WBAI to be able to receive, we have tickets. We have 3 pairs of tickets to this concert, but also 3 pairs to the next 2 we're going to talk about. The Rainbow Fish by Mermaid Theatre of Nova Scotia, a family program on Saturday, December 8th. And
yeah, and
go for it.
Yeah, and then just to say, Mermaid Theatre, we've had them before. So they're a really fantastic theater work for kids, and that continues our, one of our programming streams is trying to present theater work for really young audiences. And we really, I have to give credit to our executive and artistic director, Ellen Kodadak, who has a really fantastic taste in unique programs for young children that really are different than your typical kids' work that you might see. That's, these are kids. This is children's work that it explores deep themes and has really strong emotional resonance. So, I definitely, anyone who has kids should really check out Rainbow Fish.
And what I love about the family performances is often they're much more intimate, and it's so amusing for me as an adult without a kid, sitting in the back watching all these kids creep up closer and closer and closer to the stage when these performances happen. The third event, Sami, is From Ecuador to the World on Sunday, December 9th. That is under the baton of Maestro Manuel Campos. The Ecuadorian Youth Orchestra will present rich sounds of the Americas, including music by Gershwin, Cardenas, and Piazzolla. This is an exciting youth orchestra that's coming to Queens, I believe, for the first time on Sunday, December 9th.
The king of Argentinian classical tango, just to throw that in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just showing off now, sorry.
Joel's been great. He quoted Annie Hall before, and I was really impressed. I didn't even remember that line about spiders.
Well, the fact that he knows what Kulthum is impresses me, so.
Well, a little secret, my only really bourgeois deal is that I'm a huge record collector, and I have at least one piece of recorded music from every UN member nation. And to cover myself, as well as Palestine, Kurdistan, and the Basque region of Spain. Looking ahead.
Wow,
anyway.
That is impressive.
So, Sami, we've got a few minutes left, 2 or 3 minutes left. What else is going on at Flushing Town Hall these days that you want our listeners to know about?
Well, I think the most exciting thing is that we are about to enter our 40th anniversary year in 2019. We were founded as Flushing Council on, you talk about name changes. Our actual legal name is Flushing Council on Culture and the Arts, and we were founded in 1979 with that mission to really present global arts. And it's our 40th anniversary year, and we got a fantastic $40,000 challenge grant that we need to raise the match for. So I realize you're doing fundraising for WBAI, but we need money too at Flushing Town Hall.
And that's why for our listeners, this is really great, because as much as you're having this challenge grant, you're also you want to raise money. You also donated some tickets for us to be able to provide to listeners today when they donate. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would say in general that as much as listeners feel generous towards Flushing Town Hall and WBAI, there's a lot of great causes in the city, and really appreciate people's generosity. At Flushing Town Hall, donations will be doubled by this challenge grant. People can check that out on our website. So we're really gearing up not just for fundraising, obviously, but for a number of 40th anniversary celebrations that are going to be coming up in 2019. So people should really follow our website and check out some of the things that are going to be coming up in the next year.
So I'd say if you have $100 to donate $50 to WBAI, $25 to Flushing Town Hall. And I got to put in a plug for Hunger Free America, the group I run.
I was wondering where that remains.
I had to get that in some, but I do want to point out, pop music is so homogenized today on the air with, sort of deadening drum machines. If you go to concerts, there's so much lip syncing. So your kind of music, which is so rare, if people haven't heard it in a number of years, you will remind yourselves how much you love hearing live music by real musicians, hearing not just the same old, but being surprised by a different kind of music and a different kind of culture than you've experienced. I can't think of a better evening than going to eat in that neighborhood and then hearing your magnificent music or your other performances. So that's my push. That's my pitch for Flushing Town Hall.
I really appreciate you saying that, because, I said earlier I'm not responsible for the programming. And, I have my own particular musical expertise in Middle Eastern music, but I, as a musician and as a New Yorker, have just learned so much by getting to attend the programs that are curated by Ellen and Gabrielle, our education director, and Sean, our marketing director, who brings fantastic and amazing work from Korea. Korea has some really amazing fusion music coming out of traditional music that's, very innovative. I've learned so much just attending the programs, and I really appreciate what you say about live music. I think even the programs that are not off the wall, even our straight-ahead jazz programs, where you're having NEA jazz masters, there's just such a difference in being able to hear musicians make it happen live, especially for jazz, where people are improvising and they're creating new stuff on the spot in front of you. And improvisation is, of course, part of a lot of world music traditions that we present. So I've learned so much, and just that experience of getting to hear something live, I think, is so important. And it is, as you say, it's diminishing. There are fewer and fewer opportunities. I think anyone who thinks they love music but is only listening to music on recordings owes it to themselves to go to Flushing Town Hall or any of the other performing arts venues. But especially Flushing Town Hall, you have the opportunity to hear so many different varieties of music that it's really, really unique.
And what instrument do you play?
I sing and I play violin, and I also play an Egyptian spike fiddle called rababa.
So which is more fun, singing, helping your auditors conduct your independent audit, or writing a grant?
I think probably helping the auditors conduct an independent audit. That's my favorite.
I feel you. Well, thank you.
Or dealing with insurance companies or government contracts.
Oh yes, well, the 5 notarized pieces of paper. Yeah. Yes, I feel your pain.
So, Sami, the website for people to go to learn more about what's on tap
is flushingtownhall.org. FLUSHINGTOWNHALL.org.
Sami Abu Shumays from Flushing Town Hall, thank you very much for joining Joel and I today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Shukran.
Good luck with the fund drive.
Oh, wait, Joel.
Sure. That's the one word of Arabic I know. Thank you. Other than food terms. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So you are listening to WBAI City Watch. This is our second hour and a special edition. It is the Fall Fund Drive here at WBAI, so please give a call to 516-620-3602 or go to give2wbai.org to contribute. We just had on Sami Shumays from Flushing Town Hall, which has happily donated 3 pairs of tickets each to 3 different events that are coming up in December. And if you contribute, and it is a low dollar amount for them, somewhere I believe between $30 and $40 for each pair, you can be able to help us continue on the air and also support some of these artists at Flushing Town Hall.
Yeah, there are only so many times you can see Spider-Man 32, or X-Men 29, or whatever they're producing out there. You never know what Hollywood's going to do. They're going to be, do a remake of Shaft with all white people. So I don't know what they're going to do, but you got to support this diverse culture here.
So, and as a reminder to our listeners, the lines are open right now. Sean is staring at them, waiting for someone to call in to 347-335-0818 to tell us what's on your mind. You could talk about our first guest and his thoughts on the rise of the alt-right, or our second guest and what it really takes to become president and to, honor the Constitution?
Yes, or if you want to tell us the top thing you're doing to oppose the Trump agenda, assuming you are, or if you're a MAGA person listening just to hate us, you can call and tell us the top thing you're doing to support his racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist, America-hating agenda. See, we're fair.
I thought I had a lot of coffee this morning.
I don't drink caffeine. People are lucky that I don't. I also think we're waiting for calls to talk about the midterms coming up. These are among the most consequential elections in our time, and we have this very curious phenomenon that the likelihood is the Democrats are going to gain the House and may even lose seats in the Senate because of the odd structure of American politics under the Constitution.
Although it's interesting because on the other show that I work on here, WBAI on Thursdays, we had guests who talked about how they expect voter turnout to be higher this year. And usually in midterms it drops off, but that they're...
Well, they're talking higher than other midterms. I doubt they're saying
not high.
And let's keep this in perspective. Even when Barack Obama was on the ballot, most people of color and low-income people still did not vote. And so we have a real problem with participation. We had on my Friday show, Christina Greer, the great political science professor from Fordham. And we were talking about all the systemic barriers against voting, particularly for non-white people, the disenfranchisement in Georgia, the laws that basically say if you've had a felony, you can no longer vote, and that disproportionately works against people of color. But having been a political professional before I became the nonpartisan, nonprofit guy I am today, and having knocked on thousands of doors in probably half a dozen states, the main reason people don't vote is not disenfranchisement. It's not long lines at the polls. It's not felon disenfranchisement. It's that people don't believe they matter. They don't believe politics matter. They don't believe the two sides are different. And in most places, even where Hillary got crushed in Pennsylvania, is a Democratic state run by a Democratic governor, Democratic mayors in the key Democratic strongholds, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. The main reason people didn't vote wasn't disenfranchisement. It's that people just didn't believe they mattered. And I think Democrats are missing that point, spending zillions and zillions of dollars on ads that no one's watching, mail that no one's reading, paid phone banks that no one's listening to, instead of giving people concrete reasons why their candidates are going to improve people's lives and why getting off your buttocks, or tuchus since it's New York, to go out and vote really matters.
And if you're listening to Joel and you have an opinion about what he's saying right now, the number to call and tell him how you feel is 347-335-0818 for about the next 10 minutes, and then we have our final guest of the day. So you are listening to, we do have a call. Oh, we have a caller. Welcome to City Watch. How are you? What's your name?
Thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel.
And where are you from, Emmanuel?
In Brooklyn.
And tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, well, what's on my mind is I think that what worries me more than alt-right is progressivism. What the term progressivism because I think it's a kind of dog whistle, and I think it's a dog whistle to a certain demographic that's not acknowledged, and it doesn't include, because usually when you say dog whistle, progressive, you're usually talking about middle class, upper middle class, whites who were usually in the past considered liberals. And I think that living in that space in terms of thinking process, it's almost like you're living in La La Land. And I think people, when you're talking about people not voting, people feeling disenfranchised from the voting process, it is because there's a kind of not understanding that there's a deeper program that's afoot. It's like running sub rosa to the political process. And there's, for instance, it's been almost 3 years into Donald Trump's campaign, and we still haven't had a Democratic candidate that could stand up and, a male, because that's what we're going to have, even a female, but someone that's going to stand up, a white male Democratic candidate that's going to stand up in Congress or in the Senate and actually confront what's going on. So we have this kind of thing that's happening, you keep saying, vote.
What do you mean confront? Every Democrat in the Senate except Joe Manchin voted against Kavanaugh, for instance.
Say for instance, look what just happened with this vote.
Right.
For this judge. It was a political mess because Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein and some other Democrats used it as a political football. It didn't matter about the judge's record, to stand on his record. They were, at least the public perceived it, at least a lot of people in the public perceived it as an insider Democrat fighting Republican type of situation. So the story about this guy not being able to be a impartial judge got pushed by the wayside. So
are you aware that he committed perjury? Forget the Blasey Ford allegations.
Of course he committed perjury, but what I'm saying is we're at the point in this country where people don't care. It's a matter of beating people down. If we've got Donald Trump as president, what do you think? You think he didn't commit perjury? So it's like you're
I'm not sure what you're saying. Saying because everyone's a liar, nothing matters?
What I'm saying is that what's being pushed out here, on a daily basis, is that nothing matters. You could do whatever. We're living in an unreal time. And so when you're talking about changing unreal to real, to make people really understand that this is something that's going to continue for the next foreseeable future, and you don't have candidates that can actually speak up for poor people, not saying working people, not dog whistling, progressive dog whistling, but really speaking up, okay, and getting those people to feel that they have a voice.
So what
then
specific?
You're not going to have anything.
So what specific thing would you say you'd like to see a Democratic leader do or say that they're not doing now?
I'm not even talking about a Democratic leader. I'm talking about someone who can garner the real people that I see out here. Most of the people that I talk to are not doing so well financially, okay? And if they are, they're looking around the corner about losing their job and whatever. I'm saying to you that from what I'm seeing right now, I don't see this country psychologically. I'm not worried about Donald Trump. I'm worried about the way the people, the general public out here is thinking, because if we could normalize...
Why aren't you worried about Donald Trump? Don't you see the fact that income is declining?
Donald Trump is not the problem. Donald Trump got voted in by a lot of women, by a lot of
white women.
Yes, okay, and those white people are the majority in this country. So whatever they want, it's going to go. Okay, that Browning of America stuff, I think that's another way of throwing people off and galvanizing the white population and scaring them to think that they're going to be the less and they're going to take over this country. That's a ruse. And I keep hearing it.
I guess my problem is I don't see you connecting the things you care about, which are things I care about. I've been an anti-poverty advocate my whole life. Don't you see the reason we have so much poverty is because of the policies of Donald Trump and the Republicans?
Course, but it's not because of the Republicans. It's because of the Democratic Party, too. They are afraid to say poor. They are afraid to use that word. And so because they've been the Clinton era Democrat, has now pretty much adopted the Republican strategy, and that's what I'm talking about.
Well, we've got to run. We appreciate your call. I must say, though, by the end of the Clinton presidency, African American and Latino poverty was its lowest point in U.S. history.
Yeah, but you know what? And so was the prison rate too. Okay, and that's what I'm saying to you. It's taking with one and giving back with the other.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate it.
So you are listening to me, Jeff Simmons, and co-host Joel Berg on City Watch on WBAI New York 99.5 FM and streaming live at WBAI.org. Coming up in just a short while will be our final guest. And it is once again the WBAI Fall Fund Drive. Please call and pledge at 516-620-3602 or go online to give to, that is the number 2, WBAI.org. We have time for one other call if you'd like to call in. We've about 2 minutes left before we go to the final segment. And the number to call is 347-335-0818. Joel, any other thoughts before our final guest?
I just think sometimes it's frustrating for me as a political activist that people allow themselves to be distracted by all the noise out there and all the shiny objects. Without saying that, yeah, the Democrats aren't perfect and the progressive movement isn't perfect, but to say because they're not perfect, they're just the same as the other side is missing the boat. Census Bureau came out with data a few weeks ago that the average income for working people in America declined last year when the Dow Jones went up 25% and the Fortune 400 went up 25%. Median African American income declined last year. So Kanye aside, we're missing the boat that there are specific, if you heat water, it boils. You can't look at the boiling water and go, geez, we don't know what caused it. We know what caused it. We know the main cause of our problems in America and their conservative political policies.
Do we have another guest on the line? We've got someone on the line on City Watch. What is your name and where are you from?
I'm Dana calling from Crown Heights. I just want to disagree with what I see as a false representation of the Moynihan experience. I think if you listen to Moynihan at the UN, for example, I mean, you see like a double of Nikki Haley. I think when the liberals were in, Moynihan pretended to be a liberal. And when the conservatives were in, he did the benign neglect. You can, it's a very apt turn of phrase, but when the conservatives came in, he was a conservative. So I just see him as an unprincipled alcoholic that projected a lot of his family dynamic in his quote-unquote critique of the black family.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to agree on that, and I certainly was not a huge fan of his. Part of it, I think, is he went with the political winds, and sometimes I personally think he just said something controversial because he liked being controversial, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. And so when we interviewed people who did the movie, we made that clear. We have to go to our next segment, but thank you so much for the call. I think that's important to note about the Moynihan legacy. We now have an interview with the great Reyna Grande, an incredible Mexican-American writer.
Hello, I'm here with Reyna Grande, who is the author of the best-selling memoir, The Distance Between Us, where she wrote about her life before and after illegally immigrating from Mexico to the United States, at least illegally under the then laws of the United States. Her much-anticipated sequel, A Dream Called Home, was just released on October 2nd, 2018. Thank you, Reyna, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
So tell me a little about your life story, how you came to the United States, and how you became a writer.
Well, my story begins in Mexico, in a very poor town in the state of Guerrero, which is the second poorest state in Mexico and now the most violent. And my father had to come to the U.S. to look for work since there were no jobs in my hometown. And my mother also ended up coming here. So by the time I was 4.5, I didn't have a mother or a father. And my siblings and I were left behind in Mexico for many years to wait for my parents to return. And it was a very difficult time for us because we didn't know if they were going to come back. We were afraid they would forget us or that something might happen to them and they were unable to come back. And of course, we were also afraid of being replaced by U.S.-born siblings. So those were very long, difficult years, and I'm grateful that when I was 9.5, my father did come back to Mexico, and he hired a smuggler to take us across the border. And at first, he did not want to bring me because I was 9.5, and he thought I was too little to make the journey across the border. But I begged my father to not leave me behind, and he didn't. He brought me to Los Angeles, and it was one of the difficult things that I found right away was that the separation that my family had gone through had very, very, very painful consequences in that my father and I were complete strangers to each other. And I think we struggled for many years to put the family back together, and it just wouldn't function the same, and it just wasn't the same anymore.
Now,
one of the things that
I'm sorry. Go. Why do you think he came in the first place? It wasn't easy, right? He came to the United States. He risked being detained crossing the border, and then he came back to get you, and he risked being detained, a second time, and risked you being detained. It took you 3 tries to get into the United States. Some people today who are ignorant of immigration make it sound like it was just some simple, easy decision, but it was not. It was a life-altering and life-risking decision, was it not, each time?
Yeah. Each time you try to cross the border, you know you're risking your life. And what is difficult also is just the situation that parents are in. You know, these immigrant parents, they're put in a place where they have to choose whether they should leave their children or take them along on this dangerous journey. And either choice has very grave consequences, whether you leave your kids behind to suffer or you take them along with you and you risk their life for a chance at something better.
And so when you finally reconnected with your father, it took a long, long, long time to really emotionally reconnect and try to become a family again. Then what happened?
Well, we were not able to fully reconnect, but one of the things that I really loved about living with my father is that he truly believed in the American dream. And from the moment we set foot in this country, he made it very clear that he had brought us here so that we could study and have a college education and be working professionals and be homeowners one day. So he had a lot of dreams for us, a lot of expectations, and I really loved that about him. And, you know, we were undocumented at the time, and my father would always say, just because we're undocumented, it doesn't mean we cannot dream, and we shouldn't slack off just because of our legal status. We need to work hard and make sure we're ready in case there's an opportunity that presents itself. So I have learned that from my dad, you know, to work really hard and to always be ready for whatever opportunity might come my way.
And how did he define the American dream? What did it mean to him?
Well, to him, the American dream meant having a college education, a career, and a home, being a homeowner. Those were the 3 things. And also money for retirement.
Yeah.
He used to talk to me about retirement when I was 11 years old.
It's interesting. I just saw a documentary on Italian-American immigrants in New York, and one of the top things they all dreamed of was having their own home. And so we focus a lot on the differences between different immigrant groups, and there are vast differences. My mother came to the United States at 2 months old, fleeing oppression in Europe. But there are a lot of commonalities, don't you think?
Yeah, there are. I think the immigrant experience is a universal experience. And it doesn't matter what country you come from. It doesn't matter even why you're immigrating. I think the experience is the same. You know, you leave your home, you go through many difficulties. You have to leave loved ones behind and then try to create a new home and find a place to belong where you're going. So the heartbreaks, the sorrows, and the dreams are very universal.
Yeah, and I think in the end, it's about economic opportunity, having a better ability to feed your family, a better ability to house your family, a better ability to get an education. It's about fleeing war and violence, and it's about fleeing oppression. And I think that unites all immigrants, which would mean the vast majority of Americans. Even Native Americans came here 10 or 20,000 years ago, and even African Americans were brought here involuntarily, but they were immigrants. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your new book. It's just out, it's much anticipated, A Dream Called Home.
Yeah, and it's called A Dream Called Home because I have been dreaming of a home and yearning for a home since I was a little girl and my parents left. I think that was the beginning of me dreaming of one day having a home again. And the book is it's about my journey of trying to find a home and trying to find my place in America. I write about being a first-generation university student and the challenges that I had to overcome at the university. I write about my dream of becoming a published writer and all the things that I had to go through and sacrifice in order to make that a reality. I also write some more about my family and the distance that continued to separate us and the continuous effect of that family separation and immigration. So I write about all these things, and I feel that it really touches on the experiences of many of our young people today, first generation university students, the undocumented immigrant experience. It asks the question, how do you turn a dream into a career? And I feel that a lot of people can relate to that, especially writers and artists who always struggle to make a career out of a dream, and also the family dynamics.
Now, in Hamilton mixtape, a follow-up Manuel Miranda did to Hamilton, he has this piece that he's done with some rappers called I Wrote My Way Out, and how writing was an escape, and writing was opportunity, and writing was sort of a pathway to the future. Did you feel that way about your writing?
Oh, absolutely. And that is something that I explore a lot in A Dream Called Home. I explore how writing was an act of survival for me because I started to write when I was 13 years old, and I didn't know the words trauma and PTSD and anxiety and depression. I just knew there was something wrong with me, and I felt trapped. And when I first started writing, it was for me to try to express everything I was feeling, and I didn't know how to put it into words, how to say it aloud. So I decided to write it down instead. And writing became a lifeline for me, and little by little, I felt that I was able to set myself free from my trauma by writing about it and by confronting it and by trying to understand it. And every book I've written, I felt like I'm a different person from when I first started writing the book to when I finished writing the book. I'm a different version of myself. I'm a better version of myself because the act of writing helps me to heal, and it also brings me to a place of deeper understanding and more compassion for myself and for my family.
Now, we all know there are many people in America, and I'd throw the president in there, who just say utterly racist things without compunction, but they're usually considered conservatives. What I've learned over the years from friends of mine who are people of color and Latino and Latina who have gone to college, have gone to professional programs or graduate programs, and been in workplaces surrounded by people who call themselves progressive, who think of themselves as liberal, who say utterly patronizing, idiotic things to people of color. So it's not just sort of the enemy, so to speak, it's people around us who consider themselves friends. Was that your experience?
Yes, I have heard a lot of idiotic things in my life. And I think that's why I write so much, because it's my way of pushing back against those ideas. Sometimes I'm not very quick on my feet when I hear those things. I don't know how to respond or what to say right at that moment, and it takes me a while to think of what it is that I'm trying to say. And I think this is why I love writing so much, that it gives me a chance to really explore my feelings and my thoughts at my own pace and in my own, using my own voice to push back against what I hear and what I see being done against the Latino community. So every time I write, it's my way of protesting. So each book is a protest. And it's also, each book is a celebration of my Latino community and experiences.
Now, you wrote in the New York Times in August an op-ed called "The Impossible Choice My Father Had to Make." And in response to Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, essentially blaming parents for children being separated from their families. And she said we should, quote, be very careful of incentivizing behavior that puts children at risk, end quote. So tell me a little about your response in that piece.
Yeah, well, that piece, it was born out of frustration and anger, and also indignation at hearing that the heartless things that were happening at the border with family separation were being blamed on the immigrant parents. And I was very upset, because I know that, thinking about my own father and the place that he was put in to make a difficult choice, whether to leave his children or bring them along and risk their lives, I know it was an impossible choice, and it really broke my heart to think of my father being in that situation, because I'm a parent now too. I'm a mother, and the thought of being put in that place where I need to decide whether I should leave my children or take them along, I can't even bear the thought of being put in that situation. So I've been thinking a lot about my father and all the other parents in the world who are put in that situation. So when I heard her say that, and also when I heard Jeff Sessions say, well, if parents don't want their children taken from them, they shouldn't bring them along in the first place, it really struck a chord, and I really felt the need to speak up for my father and for all the other parents in the world right now who are looking at their children and wondering, what choice are they going to have to make.
Yeah, and I always make 2 points. Number one is, for the first few hundred years that Europeans came into the land now called the United States, there were no immigration laws. And two, many of the problems in Mexico and Central America, the poverty and violence, have deep, deep, deep roots in American policies of colonialism and neo-colonialism. So I say to my American friends, or not so much friends, that if you want to reduce the desperate need of immigrants to come here from Mexico and Central America, maybe we should do something to reverse our policies that have increased poverty and violence there. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I've been saying that for many years as well. And what I find is that, yeah, there's a lot of ignorance. You know, people don't realize how much the U.S. has been responsible for all of this immigration going on right now. And I think it's because, you know, in schools, our children don't grow up learning about these things. They don't know about Americans' involvement in Mexico, in Central America, and South America. They don't really understand the decisions that we make and our foreign policy, how much they affect other countries and how much they contribute to the immigration crisis. I think it would be really important, you know, for our children to start learning more about this in school. But what I see is that instead of trying to address these things more and more, you know, textbooks seem to leave out a lot of things. And one of the things that it leaves out that I'm actually writing about right now is the Mexican-American War. And I believe that if we start to really address our history and try to deeply understand the history of this country in relation to other countries like Mexico, for example, we would be able to get a better understanding of what's going on right now.
Yeah, out of all the things that frustrate me about immigrant haters and all the ironies is how many people live in states or cities with Spanish names, and they're Spanish names because they used to be part of Mexico or / New Spain, and now they say, "Oh, you've got to speak English." It's crazy. I want to close out with this. Do you think that more Latinos and Latinas should register to vote and vote to change the situation?
Yes, I think everybody should, not just Latinos and Latinas. I think everyone should definitely vote. Register to vote, go speak up, raise your voice.
Well, I focus on that because richer white people are already voting. And if we get more low-income people of color and people of color in general who feel disenfranchised, then we can actually have progressive change.
Yes, I think so. And I think one of the things that I try to do is when I visit a lot of college and universities, and I always try to encourage young people to also vote, because we need to get to our young people and get them to be more engaged in the voting process, and we need them to really be more active participants.
Excellent. Well, we've been talking to Reyna Grande. She's not only an award-winning writer, she's also an inspirational speaker, and you can hear from this interview how inspirational she is. She's probably best known so far for The Distance Between Us, her 2012 memoir, but she just came out with A Dream Called Home, a sequel, and we look forward to all the other great things you're going to write and all the other great inspiration you're going to share with us. So thank you so much, Reyna Grande.
Oh, thank you.
So another edition of City Watch is coming to a close in just a few moments.